And really the only people who benefit at the end of the day are the hotels.
Aloha and welcome to the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. I'm Joe Kent. Well, a new law took effect on January 1st of 2025 that gives the counties more clarity over the regulation of short-term rentals. But what does that mean for the local short-term rental market? Today we have three guests to discuss this issue. Jennifer Wilkinson is the executive director and president of the Hawaii Mid and Short-Term Rental Alliance, otherwise known as HIMAST, and the founder of the Hawaii Island Short-Term Rental Alliance. Kelly Lee is the president of the Oahu Short-Term Rental Alliance and a board member of HIMAST, and Caitlin Miller is the executive director of the Maui Vacation Rental Association, and she's also a board member of HIMAST. So welcome all of you.
Thanks for having
Thank you,
us.
Joe.
Well, thanks for joining. We really want to dig in because that new law might affect things dramatically. And Kelly, I want to start with you because this all started with a lawsuit on Oahu in 2022. My understanding, the U.S. District Court blocked the city of Honolulu from restricting short-term rentals. So how did that play out? What did the court find in that lawsuit?
The injunction basically said that the city would not be allowed to eliminate or phase out 30 to 89-day rentals in residential and agricultural areas because these were being used as they're, although the time frame might be different, they were being used as residential.
Okay, so tell me if I have this right. The city at the time was trying to restrict any short-term rental that was of like more than 30 days and less than 90 days. Is that correct? And so this lawsuit concerned that time frame of rentals.
Correct. So on Oahu, we do have a big midterm rental market. Month-to-month rentals have been a part of our landscape for decades. They've always been a part of the housing, important housing component on Oahu. So it's especially necessary for us to have temporary furnished rentals.
And the court found basically that this had been going on for so long as a regular usage in the residential districts that now changing that would be somewhat of a takings. Is that right?
Correct. So, because it's been legal and people bought properties based on being able to rent month to month, which has been the standard on Oahu, and taking that away would be taking their rights away.
Mm-hmm. So Jennifer, lawmakers last year passed SB 2919, which was signed into law and took effect on January 1st of this year. That law, it seems, was really related to the case we just talked about. What did that law do, and how does that change things?
Well, interestingly enough, that lawsuit that you just spoke about, Kelly, that was the impetus for the drafting of the bill, SB 2919. Because before that, the Hawaii revised statutes expressly prohibited counties from eliminating residential use property. So SB 2919, and in fact, the court did rely on the Hawaii revised statutes for their ruling. So SB 2919 actually went back into the Hawaii revised statutes to clarify that they wanted to give the counties the right to phase out these uses. So what that bill specifically said is that the state does not recognize transient accommodation rentals to be residential use, and specifically authorize counties to phase out such use through their own zoning ordinance as they deem appropriate. So while the law 2919, which became Act 17, doesn't require the counties to act, it basically removed the prohibition and allows the counties to determine their own needs.
You
So
know
it
what
changed everything.
what I notice sometimes is when there's a state law that allows the counties to do something, sometimes the very next day you all of a sudden see the mayors and the county council members rush to action. And I was wondering if county councils across the state have rushed to action to pass bills related to this that would restrict short-term rentals.
They absolutely have. You see that. Caitlin can speak to that. That's exactly what Maui rushed to do. Hawaii Island also had a set of bills that moved through the process, started in 2022 and worked its way until it died last year in November. And then OSTRA, of course, is they've got some things brewing, but the 2919 didn't tell the counties they had to act. It just allows them
Allowed them
the
to. Okay.
authority to do something. Now, what it doesn't do is it doesn't protect the counties anymore. So the counties have to be careful to understand the nuance of what they can and should do. So something you said, Joe, about what's a taking. Now it's on the counties to balance any ordinance that they are attempting to pass with what they can and shouldn't do
I
based
see.
on actual
Okay,
constitutional.
we'll get to that more. But let's go to Caitlin on Maui. What did Maui do in response?
Yeah, so I don't even think the ink had quite literally dried yet on the governor signing 2919 before Maui County announced Mayor Bisson in conjunction with Kiani Rollins Fernandez, one of our council members, announced a bill to phase out approximately 7,100 short-term rentals on Maui in response to 2919 and the current housing crisis happening in Maui County. It's specifically targeting a group of zoning, A1, A2 zoning on the Minatoya list. And so that bill was introduced in May and is just now kind of reaching council early 2025. And we expect that to be heard sometime in the next few months for its first hearing. But they acted swiftly. In regard to what Jennifer was alluding to, is that the county always had the power to introduce a bill like that, even before 2919 was passed. What I think it did for Maui County, specifically, is create this, what I would call more validity, right, to the claim of phasing out these short-term rentals, right? It took away any barriers that they might have had before with the state, and allowed this public perception that, oh, now we have the power to do this, when in reality, they always did have the power to go after the Minatoya list specifically. So
And
that is what we did.
The Minatoya list, as I understand it, is a grandfathered list of folks who have done short-term rentals for decades and decades and decades. And it's kind of a list of the county saying, okay, these guys can continue doing it, right? But now we're even usurping that list.
Yes, and it was codified, the list in the county code under 19.23 to allow the Minatoya list to continue the use that it was already doing with short-term rentals, really since the early 70s and 80s. So yeah, some people refer to it as grandfathered. I like to refer to it as the codified list.
Hmm.
And it has created a lot of gray area in Maui County specifically with the way that the zoning was done. So thus, this bill being introduced last year.
So Kelly, is there also a grandfather type of a list on Oahu as well?
We do have nukes, non-conforming use certificates, but we only have 114
Mm.
uh,
Hmm.
that in residential zones that could be phased out. So on Oahu, we have a lot less as far as numbers of STRs. We really only we don't even have 4,000 total, and that's with all of them combined.
Mm.
So on Oahu, we didn't see the quick response that the other islands have seen, but it could be because in a recent meeting, the council did discuss possibly phasing out the non-conforming use, but there's 114 of them, and the resources and what could happen if they did try to do that would be significant.
Hmm. Well, there have been several bills, though, over the years on Oahu that have tried to crack down, that so they say, on short-term rentals. And but I think the most recent one was Bill 64, which was a sort of omnibus land use ordinance restructuring that included some language about short-term rentals in it. So what have the recent bills in Honolulu um, tried to do? And if those bills are still in place, then does the state law, SB 2919, does that affect the powers of those laws?
For Oahu, uh, it could affect it, and yes, they could if they so choose to use their power to do that. But on Oahu, our enforcement has been pretty good. So we don't have a huge amount of illegal activity. So there's got to be some compromise on what is it going to be worth it, and how are they going to do it strategically and accurately.
Let's stop right there because this is, I think, one of the common fuzzy words in the short-term rental lingo is illegal. Sometimes some people think that all short-term rentals are illegal, but there's a very fine distinction between that. Any of you, would anyone want to correct me on that one?
It varies. It
Yeah.
depends. I guess illegal would be any short-term rental or rental of less than 180 days that's in operation in violation of the existing county laws.
Mhm.
And that varies from island to island. And
I
that's
see. What
that's one of
about Kelly on Oahu? You mentioned that um, there are short-term rentals, but many of them are legal. What does that constitute?
They are either going to be a hotel unit, which is like an individually owned hotel unit. Then there are TVUs, which is a transient vacation unit. And those are units that are individually owned, but they register with the DPP and they pay the fees, and then they are legal. There are some that are eligible to register but haven't. So you could call them illegal, but they're not, they have the opportunity
I
to
see. I
register, but
see.
they haven't. So
Hmm.
they're not
Okay.
completely illegal. They're in the right
Right.
places, and but they haven't registered.
Right. Right. I see. Um, it's like sometimes I forget to fill out a form on my taxes. Am I illegal? Or did I just forget to register something or what? Um, Jennifer, let's go to Hawaii Island. How is the new state law affecting things there, and what do you predict will happen?
Well, Hawaii Island is really the last island to regulate this area. We have the only short-term rentals that are regulated on this island are those that are not in resort zones. So if you're in a zone that is deemed uh, appropriate for short-term rental, you simply register and that's it. But any hosted rentals, if you are a hosted rental, you do not need to register. So what we have we've got non-conforming use and we've got short-term vacation rental. So all short-term rentals are STR, short-term vacation rentals. But if you're outside of the resort zone or a zone appropriate place, you have to have a non-conforming use permit to operate. They stopped giving those non-conforming use permits in 2019. So there have been no new non-conforming use permits issued since 2019. And those permits have been dwindling, obviously, through attrition. And those are typically in residential areas and unhosted. So there's this huge presence of hosted rentals here on the island, and it's very fuzzy because they don't have to register and they are not separately regulated. So
Mhm.
what we think will happen based on the bills that we're working through the system last year, they've been tabled, but there's an economic impact study that's being done right now by a third party. It was commissioned middle of the year last year by our council and is expected to come back mid-year this year And simultaneously, I hear the county council is working on a series of bills that would address the same issues that the prior bills did, but in smaller chunks. So addressing registration, addressing zoning, addressing how to operate, those types of things in different bills. So we're expecting to see a series of bills that attempt to bring all short-term rentals, both hosted and unhosted, under the same umbrella and applying some type of operational standards and registration process and renewals. That's what we're
I
expecting.
see. Well, it sounds like more regulation to me. And that
Yeah.
right now, I think that it's interesting because on the Big Island, there are so many people. I grew up on the Big Island, and I know so many people who do rent some space in their home. Maybe they haven't registered, but it's almost been a part of the community for decades and decades. And now we're going to sort of codify so many different things about that. I want to talk about the legal aspect of this, though. The state is kind of removing its liability in a sense when it comes to whether or not this is decided to be a taking. Uh, Jennifer, it seems like you suggested that the counties then would take on that legal liability and risk if the courts do say that it's a taking. So in a sense, this still could be argued that these property uses have been granted and can't be taken away, right?
Absolutely. Um, I think that was alluded to at some level in the district court decision that was complete on Oahu a couple of years ago, although they relied on Hawaii revised statutes because it was our law versus constitutional law. But yes, if you're taking away a currently legal vested property right, you are definitely looking at potential takings violations. So, as these various ordinances across each island are being considered, that's one of the issues that us as advocates are trying to have discussions with our council members to make sure that they're not violating constitutional law and trying to balance that public need with takings. And so yes,
Hmm.
that is a huge concern, and hope that our counties really take that into consideration because it's public funds that'll be fighting fighting those
Hmm. Well,
ordinances.
it's somewhat of a misconception too, right? Like the people might think, oh, the state law makes it so that they're not going to have a court case, but no, this is just the start.
Yeah,
What do you say, Caitlin? How will this affect the short-term rental market and the Minatoya list and all those thousands you said, right?
Yeah.
Of people will be affected.
Approximately 7,100 units is what's currently being considered by county council. Again, it's the A1, A2 zoning, apartment 1, apartment 2 zoning that they're specifically looking at on the Minatoya list. And yeah, I mean, there is a serious concern that the county needs to consider when they are looking at moving this bill forward in terms of what that looks like from a legal standpoint. And so I do think there's a strong legal argument to, especially with the phase out periods that were proposed by the county and by the mayor to move these things forward. We have been fighting the Minatoya list battle for many years. This is not the first time this has come up. It was most recently came back up in 2021. It died at the first council hearing because they decided that it's a really complex issue that obviously has a lot of different facets to it. I think one of the biggest things that we're trying to overcome is the perception that just by getting rid of these short-term rentals, that it's not causing any harm to local people, right? And that's one of the biggest things are the jobs and the economy that are attached to these short-term rentals and what's going to happen within the local community. So to your point, Joe, you're saying like, oh, well, now there's no legal ramifications because this passed and we could do it. And that's really not the case. And there is going to be a very very significant legal liability levied against Maui County if they decide to move this bill forward. So,
Mhm.
we're just waiting to see. Much similar to the Big Island, we did commission an economic impact study as well. Our council set aside funds to do that. And it has recently, if you have seen the news in the last couple of weeks, kind of gotten off track a little bit. And now we're looking in Maui County of doing it in-house as well, because we weren't able to secure an outside
Mm.
vendor to do that. So now the question becomes, are they able to really get an economic impact study that encompasses the full breadth of what we're talking about? And, how quickly can that happen? And will it be considered a legitimate report, once it comes out? So we're definitely in a precarious position in Maui County. We have some additional factors at play, due to the fire and the increased housing crisis as a result of that. And everyone wants to see housing solutions, but we want housing solutions that benefit the community, and don't create other problems, and unintended consequences by making rash decisions.
My understanding of the what they call short-term rentals on Maui, they're really like condo-tels.
Yeah.
The old hotel, some of them look exactly like a hotel. Some of them are positioned right next to a hotel. You can't tell the difference between the hotel and the condo-tel. I guess the misconception is that if these are then converted into what long-term rentals, that they would somehow help bring down the affordability in Maui County. But I mean, a lot of them look like oceanfront properties to me, which would be very expensive.
Yeah, there is it's a very interesting thing there. I think that's a very common misconception when people think about short-term rentals. I think across the state, but especially in Maui County right now, given what's going on, they tend to think these single-family homes, that have been in families for generations and then got turned into short-term rentals, and that's really not the case. There's just over 13,000 short-term rentals on Maui. Most of those are condos. We have around 300 properties across the entire island that are single family homes. And that's a combination of bed and breakfast. So someone has to live on site and help manage the property, and short-term rental permits. And those are rigorous. It's not an easy process to go through in order to get a short-term rental permit or a bed and breakfast permit. And right now, for almost 5 years now, the county has not been issuing any additional short-term rental permits. So there's not this permeation into the community that I think people tend to think about when they think about this. And you're exactly right. They're mostly condo tells. The CCNRs, when you pull them for these complexes, were built with the intention of allowing transient vacation use. A lot of them have really strict rules regarding parking and the number of cars that can be there, pets, and all sorts of things. And they're saddled with extreme association dues, that were extreme before the fire. Everyone's seeing across the entire country increase in insurance rates because of what happened on Maui, in North Carolina, in California. And so, yeah, and most of them are Mackay side of the road. So in addition to that, you have failing seawalls, sea level rise exposure, and these things that are a huge financial burden, to the people who own them, whether you are local or not. And so there is a lot of misconception about what that inventory looks like. And, that's part of what we do with MVRA, is trying to educate people exactly on what this is and who it's really going to impact at the end of the day. And again, the largest impact is going to come to locals and the people who just depend on this income to survive.
Well, Kelly, you mentioned that the enforcement is pretty strong on Oahu. That enforcement is done, I think, primarily by Department of Planning and Permitting. Is that correct? And if the administration decides to put more focus on enforcement, then would that in a sense, make the Department of Planning and Permitting even slower in its efforts to do its other works? Or, are we just putting more work onto a busy department?
That we are definitely, if they've already done so well, when Bill 41 came down and they phased out all short-term rentals in residential neighborhoods. The idea was it was going to provide affordable housing, or their stock would open up for residents. The prices would drop. Neither of those things happened. Prices went up. Inventory did not go up. So that was inaccurate. So now that all the residential ones are phased out for the most part, if DPP is given any more work with a backlog of 2+ years for a permit, there's just not enough. They don't have the staff. They would need to double their staff. They're already short-staffed and overworked. So more regulation is going to put a bigger burden on the DPP. And what's the reward going to be when it's already, our numbers are so small? Is that a good use of our resources?
Hmm. That's really interesting. So it may be, so what you're saying is that there already was an experiment on Oahu to lessen the amount of short-term rentals that exist, and that effort resulted in fewer short-term rentals, but it did not result in more homes available for affordable housing and so on, did not bring home prices down, for example. Now, if we do more of the same and, overburden this department, it actually might have the opposite effect of what people think when it comes to home prices, because
Yeah,
there wouldn't be as many homes being, approved.
right. And at that time, the median home price was a little over $1 million. It was 1,025,000. And now it's up 100,000 from that
Hmm.
point.
Hmm.
So
Right.
we really have to decide, is it a good use? Is it going to have the desired effect? And Oahu is kind of a cautionary tale that no, it's not going to have the desired effect.
But what about locals though? How do they do short-term rentals and vacation rentals, and how does this help local residents in any way? Many could argue that, well, having these in our neighborhoods, first, they cause a lot of noise. This is the argument, and disruptions and so on. Then there's other arguments that they use up homes that locals could be using to live in. So, okay, that's the downside. But what are the upside? And you can speak to the downside or the upside. Anyone?
Uh, I would say like you said, Joe, on the Big Island, hosted rentals are the norm, and it helps people be able to afford to stay here. We already have a mass exodus of residents every year for 10 years now. So that gives them a way to afford to be able to stay. And the thought that it causes noise in the neighborhoods or disruptions. I've lived here my entire life. For generations, my family has lived here. So, and tourism has always been part of our life. And allowing residents to participate in the tourism economy is important because it is the backbone of our economy statewide. So,
Hmm.
and that it causes noise and disruptions in neighborhoods. They're not just saying that on Oahu. They that's a narrative that is nationwide, and it's largely, I think, permeated by the hotel industry because
Hmm.
they want those units they want people to only stay in hotels. But that doesn't benefit the local community as much because that money is going offshore.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, you should hear how much noise my neighbors make who don't do short-term rentals. It's a lot. But in any case, Jennifer, what would you say to those who wonder about the costs and benefits of short-term rentals?
I think we're in the same situation. Of course, everybody has those complaints, but those are issues that everybody has, as you just mentioned. And they're also issues that are dealt with in other ordinance. There are noise ordinance, there are parking ordinance, there are ways to handle those things that have nothing to do with additional regulation based on who's occupying something. You can have a long-term owner next door that has parties every weekend. It does nothing to, regulating short-term rentals has nothing to do with a systemic addressing of parking issues or noise. So we say that that's not really an issue here. And they dealt with unhosted rentals 5 years ago. So there are no new rentals appearing. And the ones that are left are the hosted rentals. So these are people, residents like myself, who live here. This is my neighborhood. And they tend to take pride in their property and making sure that their neighbors are not upset. And so I would argue the opposite, that if you have a hosted rental, you're more likely to not have those complaints be issued against you. So in addition to that, as Kelly said, it absolutely helps the folks here be able to stay here. It's a housing security issue. As you know, we are a very big island, and we have hotels, sure, in Hilo, one or two, and some on the Kona side and on the Kohala coast. But you go down to Volcano and there's one, maybe two, and so you've got to commute 2 hours if you want to stay with family or you've got business there. So this is a very needed segment of our industry, of our island, to be able to provide not only accommodation, but to help provide income for folks who would leverage property that they have to be able to help supplement their income.
Well, I want to give each of you a final thought, and then and also you're welcome to add where to contact you. But let's start with Caitlin. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I've been advocating for, so heavily is the impact that this is going to have to the community in Maui and across the state, right? When you start talking about phasing out short-term rentals, I think the biggest misconception, and the one that is so disheartening as someone who lives here, who works within the industry, not just through MVRA, but through property management, and really have my own personal story to tell, is that there is the only thing that bills like the one that we're currently experiencing in Maui County guarantee is that harm will come to people, right? It doesn't guarantee that there will be housing made available to people. And just like on Oahu, you can look at case study markets across the entire US where this has not worked, where the phase out bills have not worked, and it's had the opposite intended effect. And really the only people who benefit at the end of the day are the hotels. And so I just want people to remember that. And it's not just people who work within the short-term rental industry. I literally just had a conversation with someone yesterday with the decline in tourism on Maui as a result of copious amounts of things between COVID, the fire, and now all of the confusion regarding short-term rentals, whether or not we even want tourists on Maui, and all of these things had to sell their food truck because they couldn't make it anymore, right? And they're looking at having to move off island as a result of that. All of these things have consequences into the community outside of just the people who work within short-term rentals. And additionally, the tax revenue and the funding, if we look at the federal level right now and how many of our nonprofits this week alone lost funding, that's going to have to be made up somewhere. And if you take away additional funding from tourism and short-term rentals, that also impacts our nonprofit community and the funding that gets allotted to those people. So there's just a giant ripple effect of bills when we start talking about phasing out short-term rentals. And that's really what we want people to understand, is that this isn't a faceless organization. This isn't just people from the mainland who come here to buy, homes and don't contribute back into the community. They do, and the people who live and work here benefit from this. So I think that's what I want people to know.
Thank you. Kelly.
I think that short-term rentals have their place in every market, and trying to pretend that they're not an important component is short-sighted. And we've seen in Hawaii that tourism is, taking a hit, and we haven't really experienced that other than COVID. Tourism has been pretty strong for my entire life. And, part of that is giving people options that are affordable. And $1,000 a night hotel room is not always affordable. There's no kitchen. There's no parking. You got to pay for Wi-Fi, parking, resort fees, and it adds up. So if you have children, or you're a family, or you have dietary issues, you need a place to stay. And just telling the guests that their needs aren't important, they will go elsewhere. I mean, we're not the only island paradise in the world. We're
Mhm.
desirable, but we can't take that for granted. There are other places that people could go and spend their money. And we also have to remember that with short-term rentals, a lot of the people that work within them, cleaners and landscapers, these folks make a better living wage than they would working for a hotel. You know, the hotel workers have to fight for every dime they get, whereas STR owners tend to pay their people pretty well. The average hourly rate is $39. That's a lot higher than they're going to get, and they make their own schedule. So, and like Caitlin said, it affects the restaurants and the shops, and there's a ripple effect that just tears through the community when you try and take away something that is necessary, wanted, needed, and provides financial stability for the community and everybody working within it.
Mhm.
So I just want
Well,
people to
yeah.
understand it's an important component.
Well, Jennifer, take us home. And any final thoughts?
Um, I just worry. I feel like you know, inflation is at a high, cost of living is at a high. We don't have a diversified economy here. You know, we are an economy of tourism. It is what it is. And until we find a way to fix all of those other issues and create housing, um, and provide jobs for folks who pay them better and don't need extra income, let's not cut off our nose in spite of our face. Let's allow people to be resourceful. Let's allow them to participate in the tourism economy, and let's work on building more housing and creating a diversified economy to provide the market. Let the market react. Don't force it. That's all I said. Plus everything that the girls said. I think that was it's hard to top that.
Well, what should people do if they want to contact you at High Mast or any of the other organizations? Any contact
um,
information?
Yeah, at High Mast you can contact info at High Mast or through any of the organizations. All the organizations are members of High Mast, so we work in concert. If you're talking about Big Island, you can reach contact at HIRPA, HIRPA.org for Hawaii Island specific info.
Yeah, for Maui Vacation Rental Association, you can reach us. Our website's mvra.net, which is easier to find than the email address is membership at Maui Vacation Rental Association.org. So it's a little bit of a mouthful, but mvra.net gets you to us. We're always happy to help and answer questions, both for people who own short-term rentals and people who work within the community and live here in the islands.
And Kelly?
For OSTRA, our website is ostra.org. So that it's very easy, ostra.org. And our contact email is contact@ostra.org. It's very
Very
easy
good. Okay.
and yeah.
Well, thanks all three of you for joining me today, Kelly, Caitlin, and Jennifer. We really appreciate it. And good luck in your fight.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Joe. Thank
Joe.
you for having us.
Thank you.